Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Gosh, I've said that so many times, it truly just rolls off the tongue. Like, sometimes I'm saying it and I'm not even thinking about what I'm doing at the moment. I'm just kind of thinking about, am I going to eat a cheeseburger later for dinner or whatever? But anyway, Consistent Preterism is the name of the game. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the arguments and why I have remained Israel only all this time. Now, most of you should know that I came to Israel only sometime around maybe 2016, 2017, somewhere in that range. I would say 16 was probably my journey where I was really kind of testing things. And then, maybe 17, early 17, I'm not really sure. I know I finally went on a program with Michael Miano. That was kind of my first ever live stream about it. And I'll never forget, I was all nervous. I'm like, I really feel strongly about this, so I got to share it. And Miano at that point hadn't, cast Israel only away because he saw the truth yet. He probably still thought it was heresy and, stupid, but obviously now he feels differently. But he's got to keep that ministry flowing. Sorry, I get off track here. So anyway, I went on that show, and it was about an hour and a half rant. And honestly, I probably only had it worked out 20% of what I do now. I mean, we're talking endless puzzle pieces just clinking together since. But yeah, that was the start of it all. And then, from there, it's been, 8 years or so of just, putting out AIO content. I do enjoy reading the Bible. I'm not a big book reader as it is in general, but the Bible I do enjoy reading. And I think my enjoyment of it comes from the fact that it's deceived so many, right? I mean, it is the biggest deception in the history of humanity, and it's not even close. And it's unfortunate, but it's also mind-boggling that this could have happened when the truth is hidden in plain sight. Shout out Michael Bradley. Go pick up his book if you haven't already. It's great. Excellent resource for AIO there. But it's right there in front of us all along. It was always about Israel. The whole Old Testament is always about Israel. The final last days of Israel depicted and written about in the New Testament in various ways, apocalyptic, literature and letters and gospels and all these things. It's being written about as if it's Israel's last days, and it's the restoration of the kingdom of Israel. And with that restoration had to come the gathering of the exiles, the ones who were in the nations, the lost sheep, the sheep going astray. It had to be part of that. There's no restoration of the kingdom of Israel without that. So this mission that sets off in the New Testament when Jesus commands them to go out and seek his elect from the four winds is all about Israel. It's the restoration of the tribes of Israel, however that plays out, right? Whatever details are tossed in the New Testament narrative. Wherever Paul went, I don't care where he went, whoever he spoke to, whoever received the Holy Spirit, it was an indicator, it was a marking out, a sealing, and it was proof positive that they were of the 12 tribes of Israel according to Revelation 7. Now, there's various beliefs on what Revelation 7 is saying within AIO. I've recently become more and more convinced of my position, which I won't get into here, but I do have more coming on that down the Pike-a-Rooski. There are other AIOers that feel a certain way, which I once felt, and that's fine, right? We're still all united in the sense that salvation is for AIO, is for Israel only. Ancient Israel only, I should say. So anyway, back to the topic at hand, the El Topico. The reason why I've not left AIO in 8 years, and the reason why I've become so much further convinced about it, is simply because it's unbeatable, right? It's just irrefutable. I've seen every argument thrown at AIO. They've thrown the whole kitchen sink at it. And I listen to many of these arguments, trust me, not so much anymore because they're all the same. But in the beginning, when I was considering, when I was putting things together and, weaving it in and out and figuring things out, I always listen to arguments, always. I've listened to some scholar arguments against the position. I've listened to endless arguments from the dumbest person on the planet to who some may consider one of the wisest people on the planet. And nothing satisfies the case, right? Nothing tells me that, oh, wait a minute, something could be wrong here. AIO might not have it figured out. Now, do we have every detail figured out? No, of course not. And nobody ever will. But we are so far advanced in the scope of figuring it out than any other view out there. And this is according to my critical scholarship, my critical review, right? There is nothing that can compete. And when you look at just basic Christianity, say futurism, for instance, futurism is trapped because they have no arguments against the fact that they were living in the last days, not us, right? I mean, this is, futurism is one of those things that if you ever locked horns with, you could just stomp it out within 5 minutes because you could just come at them with, 40 different New Testament statements, unambiguous, clear statements that show that the resurrection, the judgment, the final coming of Christ was all at hand. It was all taking place in that generation. And if you're wise enough to weave it back to Matthew 24, you can very easily show that Jesus came, pointed to the temple, said, no, not one stone will be left unturned. There'll be wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes. You'll be dragged before kings and councils. And then the end will come, right? He will come back for them, right? So they were in the final generation, the chosen generation. And sure enough, when we look in Acts, we see all those things playing out right before our eyes, but people just read right over it. It's just, like I said, hidden in plain sight. We see earthquakes in Acts. We see famines in Acts. We see them being dragged before kings and counselors, them being killed in the book of Acts, right? But the gospel's going forth. This is the whole point. Regardless of their persecution and tribulation, it was going forth. And so this is all clearly proven to be in their last days, or that's the context by which the New Testament is writing from. And the futurists have no arguments for that, right? Their only hope is to go to the book of Revelation, the most symbolic book in all the Bible, apocalyptic literature, apocalyptic genre, and make arguments based on what it says there, okay? Now, that's not a good place to be. It's just not a good place to hinge your arguments, especially when you have letters written from a person to a person or people to a church, when you have the Gospels, which is, still symbolic by all means, but it's also slightly less vivid and creative as the book of Revelation. But we have letters, we have other writings in the New Testament that we can go to that clearly speak a lot more literally, all right? Writing letters to someone, they're writing about events that they were expecting to take place. And so you can easily prove that through clear, unambiguous statements, whereas the futurist would have to go to a couple places like, 1,000 years is like a day to the Lord, and make their case based on that. So in other words, the letters that were being written to real humans meant nothing to them, right? It was all deception. It was all, symbolic fluff. They had nothing to hope for, nothing to look forward to. Give me a break, right? So Peter was using obvious hyperbole, trying to comfort them because Christ had not yet come. And they were expecting his coming, so they were concerned. So Peter says, relax, a day is like 1,000 years to the Lord. So it's just metaphor. It doesn't literally mean that we're going thousands of years before, Christ would return. So anyway, futurism fails on a number of fronts. It doesn't even lift off the ground, right? It putters out like a Boeing airplane before it leaves Earth. So futurism's gone. Full preterism has the same problem. Full preterism just doesn't realize it. Full preterism, or they do and they're dishonest, but full preterism has an ending as well. The ending was that the gospel would go to all nations, all ethnos, and then the end would come. That's in Matthew 24, the same end that I just explained to you about, which is why the futurists cannot win, because that end was at the fall of Jerusalem and the end of the age, which also was the final judgment, the resurrection, the inheritance, yada, yada, yada. It was everything. That was the culmination, the final event, and that's when the story would have ended. And so the full preterist says, oh no, we know that. Of course, we can't get around the time statements, but let's make up a backstory that now exists after all those glorious final events, after the resurrection, right? I mean, go figure. After the final judgment, right? We don't need the judgment. We escape all that, right? But no, that was part of the story. In order to, get to that point, you had to partake in the judgment. And obviously, we know the book of life was opened at the final judgment. So if you're not in the book of life, if that book was already open and there's no indication of another opening down the line, which of course there isn't, then you're not in that story. And that's okay. Trust me, there's still hope without this ancient Israelite story. You just have to be a little more open-minded and not be so religiously strapped. But full preterism has a huge problem as well, because there's an ending there. And of course, they don't want to, admit to what the story actually says. So they make up things like, it was a interchange at the last trumpet. The few who remained were innerly changed, or changed on the inside, and they were made immortal, but they would die. They were clearly not in the age to come yet, because Christ said those who attained to that age would never die anymore, and they would never marry anymore. So these ones who remained to the end, they would just continue on living in marriage, and they would die one day. The complete opposite of what the age to come would look like, by the way. But regardless, the full preterist argues are obvious things and presses on in their Gnostic kingdom, where, they all just do stuff and they rule over the nations, which, explain that, right? How is a person today ruling over the nations? Well, when you ask them, they can't obviously point to anything physical that they're doing, right? Because it just doesn't make sense, even if you think about it. So what they do is they say, oh, it's spiritual, right? We're spiritually ruling over the nations, okay? And you say, okay, how so? And they say, through Christ. So, you never get any answers, right? You just get nonsense. And so this Gnostic kingdom that they are ruling and reigning over is quite interesting to me. So anyway, getting off topic. But both futurism and full preterism, they both have their huge problems, the elephant in the room type problems. And AIO has just not been refuted. It just hasn't. They're all the same arguments. They're people pointing to Old Testament texts and saying, look, it says this. They're all just, nonsense. And there's no getting around the elephant in the room, which is that this was a temporary short mission. It was for a specific people. It was for the elect sheep. It would go to all ethnos, all nations, and then the end would come, the only end. There's only one end. So the story is clearly contextual. And the curse of Adam went away at that end as well. So you're bound by the time statements. You're bound by the clear, eschatological ending events that would usher in a new age for those who attained it. And you're just bound, right? You're just bound. You're in chains. You just can't go anywhere. So, anyway, I'm about to be at my destination. Just wanted to rant a little bit and explain why, after all these years, I have not backed off AIO one bit. In fact, I've only grown stronger and surer of the truth of AIO. So, and more sure, I should say. So anyway, hope you all have a great day. I'll be back. Busy time of year. Not a lot of time to produce these things. And when I'm driving, I'm also kind of just thinking about a million things I got going on, like projects and whatnot. So I'll do the best I can. And I hope you all have a great day. Take care, everybody. Give it a like a Rooski. Bye-bye.